Hey guys, tonight we're going to explore why being a child in ancient times was a living nightmare. We often romanticise the past, imagining simpler times when life moved at a gentler pace, but the reality for children throughout most of human history was absolutely brutal in ways that would shock us today. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together, straight into the harsh reality of what it meant to be young in a world that showed no mercy to the innocent. Picture this. You're tucked into your warm bed right now, perhaps with a full belly from dinner, maybe thinking about tomorrow's plans or that new show you want to watch. Your biggest worry might be an upcoming test or a social situation at school. You have toys in your room, books on your shelf, and adults in your life whose primary job is to protect and nurture you. This is childhood as we know it, a protected space where you can grow, learn, and develop at your own pace. But what if I told you that this version of childhood, the one you're experiencing right now, is actually a very recent invention in human history? For thousands upon thousands of years, children were not seen as precious beings to be protected, but as tiny adults who needed to contribute to survival from the moment they could walk. They were economic units, potential soldiers, and often they were expendable. You're about to experience what it would have been like to be born into ancient civilizations where childhood as we understand it simply didn't exist. You'll feel the constant hunger gnawing at your stomach, the ache in your small muscles from endless labour, and the fear that stalked every moment of every day. You'll understand why most children who lived in ancient times, if they were lucky enough to survive infancy, grew up to become adults who were hardened, scarred, and often cruel themselves. Tonight, we're going to walk through 8 different aspects of ancient childhood, each one more challenging than the last. We'll experience birth without modern medicine, education through pain and punishment, the constant battle against starvation, and the horrifying reality of children being used as soldiers, slaves, and sacrificial offerings. By the end of our journey, you'll understand why being a child in ancient times was truly a living nightmare, and why the childhood you're experiencing right now is actually one of humanity's greatest achievements. Are you ready to leave behind everything you know about what it means to be young and innocent? Let's begin this journey together, starting with the very first breath you would take in the ancient world. You're about to be born, but this isn't the sterile hospital room with trained doctors and modern equipment that you might imagine. Instead, you're entering a world where your very first breath might be your last, where the act of being born is itself a gamble with death that roughly half of all children lose. Feel yourself in that moment. You're still in the womb, but something's happening. Your mother is in labour, but there's no epidural, no emergency cesarean section waiting if things go wrong, no skilled obstetrician monitoring your heartbeat. Instead, there might be a midwife, if your family is lucky, or perhaps just the other women in your village who have been through this before. They're gathered around your mother in a dim room lit only by flickering oil lamps or candles, their faces tense with the knowledge that this day could bring either joy or tragedy. Your mother is screaming, but her cries mix with prayers to whatever gods your culture believes in. Maybe she's calling out to Artemis if you're being born in ancient Greece, or perhaps to Taweret, the Egyptian goddess of childbirth. But these aren't casual prayers. They're desperate pleas born from the very real understanding that childbirth is one of the most dangerous things a woman can experience in the ancient world. Now you're crowning, and you can feel the struggle. Your mother's body is fighting to bring you into the world, but there's a problem. The umbilical cord is wrapped around your neck, cutting off your oxygen. In the modern world, this would be quickly identified and resolved, but here, in this dim room, nobody knows what's happening. The midwife, if she's experienced, might recognise the signs, but her tools are limited to her hands and whatever herbs she believes might help. You're finally born, but you're not breathing. Your tiny body is blue and limp, and for several terrifying moments, the room is silent except for your mother's exhausted breathing. The midwife turns you upside down and slaps your back, trying to clear your airways. She rubs your chest with a rough cloth, puts her mouth to yours and breathes for you. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, you let out a weak cry, but you're not safe yet, not even close. The midwife examines you carefully, looking for any signs of deformity or weakness. In many ancient cultures, babies who appeared sick or disabled were not considered viable. In Sparta, you would be taken to the elders who would decide whether you were strong enough to live. If they found you wanting, you would be left on a mountainside to die from exposure, a practice called exposure that was common throughout the ancient world. Even if you pass this first inspection, the dangers are just beginning. You're born into a world where infection is a constant threat, and the very act of cutting your umbilical cord might introduce bacteria that could kill you within days. The midwife uses whatever blade is available, maybe a sharp stone, perhaps a knife that's been used for cooking or other tasks. There's no understanding of sterilization, no antiseptics to prevent infection. Your mother tries to nurse you, but she's weak from the difficult birth and potentially malnourished herself. Her milk might not come in properly, or it might be insufficient to nourish you. In the ancient world, there were no baby formulas, no nutritional supplements. If your mother couldn't nurse you, your only hope was finding another woman who had recently given birth and was willing to share her milk, if such a woman existed and if your family could afford to pay her. The room you're in is cold and drafty. There's no central heating, no warm blankets fresh from the dryer. Your tiny body is wrapped in whatever cloth is available, maybe rough woven wool or linen that scratches your delicate skin. You're placed in a simple wooden cradle or perhaps just a basket, and you begin to understand what it means to be cold and uncomfortable. But the physical discomfort is nothing compared to the statistical reality of your situation. You've just been born into a world where your chances of seeing your first birthday are roughly 50-50. Half of all children born in ancient times died before their first birthday, and of those who survived, another significant portion died before reaching age 5. The diseases are waiting for you. Dysentery, pneumonia, measles, smallpox, plague. These aren't just names in a history book. They're going to be your constant companions, illnesses that will sweep through your community regularly, killing the young and the weak first. Your immune system is completely unprepared for this onslaught. You have no vaccinations, no antibiotics, no modern medicine to help you fight off infections that would be minor inconveniences in today's world. Your parents look at you with a mixture of love and resignation. They want to bond with you, to fall completely in love with your tiny fingers and perfect little face. But they've learned through experience not to become too attached too quickly. They've probably buried other children already, siblings you'll never meet. In the ancient world, families had many children not because they wanted large families, but because they needed to ensure that at least a few would survive to adulthood. You're hungry, but food is scarce. Your mother's milk is your only source of nutrition, but it might not be enough. You cry with hunger, but there's nothing more to give you. You're learning, even at just a few days old, what it means to want something desperately and not be able to have it. The sounds around you are harsh and unfamiliar. There's no soft lullaby music, no gentle humming of a mobile above your crib. Instead, you hear the rough voices of adults discussing whether you're going to make it through the night. You hear the sounds of daily life, animals, rough work, people arguing about scarce resources. Your nervous system is constantly overstimulated, but there's no understanding of infant psychology or the need for a calm, nurturing environment. Other children in your community peer at you with curiosity, but many of them have the hollow eyes of those who have seen too much too young. They're not playing with toys or attending school. They're already working, already contributing to the family's survival. They look at you and wonder if you'll join their ranks, or if you'll be another small body that gets buried in the community's growing collection of tiny graves. Your first weeks of life are a constant battle. Every day that you survive is a small victory, but also a reminder of how precarious your situation is. You're developing a personality, learning to recognize your mother's voice, beginning to respond to the world around you. But you're doing all of this while fighting off infections, struggling with malnutrition, and dealing with the stress of living in a world that doesn't prioritize your well-being. You're not a cherished child in the modern sense. You're a potential adult, a possible contributor to your family's survival. but only if you can make it through the gauntlet of early childhood. Your value isn't inherent. It's conditional on your ability to survive and eventually contribute. As you drift off to sleep in your rough cradle, you have no idea that you've just survived your first major challenge. Tomorrow will bring new dangers, new tests of your resilience, and new reminders of how different life is for children in the ancient world. But tonight, you're alive, and in this harsh world, that's already an accomplishment worth celebrating. You're 4 years old now, and you've managed to survive those crucial early years that claim so many children. Your body is small and undernourished, but it's tough. It has to be. Today marks the beginning of your real education, but this isn't the gentle learning environment you might expect. In the ancient world, education and pain are inseparable companions, and you're about to discover that knowledge comes at a price that would horrify modern parents. The sun isn't even up yet, but you're being shaken awake by your father's rough hands. Your body aches from sleeping on the hard ground. There's no soft mattress, no favourite stuffed animal to comfort you. You're immediately thrust into a world where every moment is a lesson, and every lesson is reinforced by the threat of violence. "Get up," your father growls, and you scramble to your feet, still groggy and disoriented. You've learned not to move slowly when an adult gives you a command. Last week you saw what happened to the neighbour's child who didn't respond quickly enough. The welts on his back served as a reminder to all the other children in your community about the importance of immediate obedience. Your first lesson of the day is about labour. At 4 years old, you're not considered too young to work. You're considered old enough to contribute. Your small hands are perfect for certain tasks that adult hands can't manage. You're sent to help with the weaving, your tiny fingers working to untangle knots in the thread. The work is tedious and your fingers quickly become raw and bloody, but crying about it isn't an option. "Pain teaches," your mother says when you whimper about your injured fingers. "The thread cuts you because you're not careful enough. Be more careful." This is your introduction to the ancient world's philosophy of education. Experience, particularly painful experience, is the best teacher. There's no gentle guidance, no patient explanation of techniques. You learn by doing, and you learn to do better by suffering the consequences of doing poorly. The older children in your community watch you with a mixture of sympathy and detachment. They remember being your age, remember the shock of discovering that childhood as a time of play and protection doesn't exist. But they've also learned to harden themselves against the suffering of others. It's a survival mechanism. Getting too emotionally invested in another child's pain is dangerous, because tomorrow it might be their turn to suffer. Your formal education begins with memorization, but the method is brutal. You're expected to learn the stories of your people, the prayers to your gods, the traditions that define your culture. But instead of gentle repetition and patient correction, mistakes are met with immediate physical punishment. You stumble over a word in a prayer, and a wooden stick cracks across your knuckles. You forget a line in a story, and you're made to kneel on sharp stones until you can recite it perfectly. The man teaching you, perhaps a priest or elder, doesn't see this as cruelty. In his mind, he's preparing you for a world that will show you no mercy. "The gods punish those who forget their prayers," he explains as he raises the stick again. "Better you learn this pain now than face their wrath later." This is the logic of ancient education. Better to hurt children in controlled ways than to leave them unprepared for the much greater hurt that awaits them in the world. You're learning to read and write, but even this basic skill comes with constant physical reminders. Your fingers are still small and clumsy, and holding a stylus or reed pen is difficult. When your letters are imperfect, the teacher doesn't show you how to improve. He strikes your hand and tells you to try again. You learn to write through repetition and pain, your muscle memory formed as much by the desire to avoid punishment as by the desire to communicate. The other children around you are learning the same way. You hear them crying out when they make mistakes, see them nursing bruised hands and backs, watch them struggle with the same lessons that challenge you. But you also see something else, the way they're changing. The gentle expressions of early childhood are being replaced by harder, more cautious looks. They're learning to survive, but they're also learning to accept violence as a normal part of life. Your education isn't just academic, it's also practical, and the practical lessons are often the most brutal. You're learning to work with dangerous tools, to handle fire, to care for animals that might kick or bite. But instead of being taught safety first, you learn safety through injury. You burn yourself on the cooking fire, and that teaches you to be careful around flames. You get kicked by a goat, and that teaches you to approach animals differently. The concept of childhood mistakes being normal, even healthy, doesn't exist in your world. Every error is a failure that deserves punishment. Every moment of clumsiness or forgetfulness is treated as a character flaw that needs to be beaten out of you. You're not allowed to learn at your own pace. You're expected to absorb knowledge and skills as quickly as possible, because your survival and your family's survival might depend on it. You watch older children who have been through this system, and you see how it's shaped them. They're competent and hardened, capable of handling tasks that would challenge many adults in the modern world. But they're also suspicious, quick to anger, and often cruel to those younger or weaker than themselves. They've learned that might makes right, that pain is an acceptable teacher, and that showing weakness invites more suffering. Your body is constantly sore from the physical demands of your education. Your hands are calloused and scarred from working with rough tools and materials. Your back aches from long hours of labour. Your mind is always alert, always ready for the next command or the next potential punishment. You're developing the hypervigilance that will serve you well in the dangerous world of ancient times, but you're also losing the natural curiosity and joy that should characterise childhood. The lessons never stop. Even when you're eating, if food is available, you're being taught table manners through sharp corrections. Even when you're supposed to be sleeping, you're expected to be quiet and still, and any movement or sound brings swift punishment. You're learning that your needs, your comfort, your desires are completely secondary to the expectations of the adults around you. You're also learning about hierarchy and your place in it. You're at the bottom, below every adult and below older children. Your opinions don't matter, your preferences are irrelevant, and your consent is never sought. You're learning to accept this position, to understand that your role is to obey without question, and to endure without complaint. The psychological impact of this educational system is profound. You're developing a worldview where violence is normal, where pain is expected, where gentleness is weakness. You're learning that love is conditional, based on performance and obedience rather than inherent worth. You're discovering that the world is fundamentally hostile, and that survival depends on being harder, tougher, and more ruthless than those around you. But you're also learning incredible resilience. Your 4-year-old body is adapting to challenges that would break many modern adults. Your mind is developing the kind of focused attention and memory that comes from knowing that mistakes have serious consequences. You're acquiring skills and knowledge at a pace that's remarkable, even if the methods used to teach you are horrifying by modern standards. As night falls and you're finally allowed to rest, your small body curled up on the hard ground, you're already a fundamentally different child than you were that morning. Each day of this education system is changing you, hardening you, preparing you for a world that will demand incredible toughness and resilience. You're learning that childhood is not a time of protection and nurturing, but a time of preparation for the harsh realities of adult life. Tomorrow will bring more lessons, more pain, more challenges. But tonight, as you drift off to sleep with your body aching and your mind processing the day's harsh teachings, you're already becoming the kind of person who might be able to survive in the ancient world. The education of pain is working, even as it's destroying the innocence that should be your birthright. You're 6 years old now, and you've learned many harsh lessons about survival in the ancient world. But perhaps the most constant, most relentless teacher of all is hunger. It's your perpetual companion, a gnawing ache in your belly that never completely goes away, shaping every decision you make and every relationship you form. Today, like every day, you're going to experience what it means to fight for your very survival, one meal at a time. You wake up before dawn, but not by choice. Your stomach is cramping with hunger, the familiar pain that's become as much a part of waking up as opening your eyes. You've learned to sleep through a lot of discomfort, but sometimes the hunger is so intense that it cuts through even the deep sleep of an exhausted child. You lie there for a moment, small hand pressed against your concave belly, trying to remember when you last had a full meal. It's been days, maybe weeks. Your family's food stores are nearly empty. The harvest was poor last season. Too much rain followed by too little, a pattern that's become devastatingly familiar. Your parents have been eating less so you children can eat more, but even with their sacrifice, there's simply not enough to go around. You can see the strain in their faces, the way your mother's clothes hang loose on her frame, the way your father's cheekbones have become more prominent as his face has grown gaunt. Today is market day in the nearest town, and you're going with your mother to see what food might be available. But you're not going as customers. Your family has nothing to trade except labour and whatever scraps of value you've managed to accumulate. You're going as beggars, though no one will use that word directly. Instead, you'll offer to work for food, to clean, to carry, to do whatever tasks might earn you a handful of grain or a piece of bread. The walk to town is several miles, and you're already weak from hunger. Your legs feel shaky, and you have to stop several times to rest. Your mother carries you when she can, but she's weak too, and carrying a 6-year-old is beyond her diminished strength for more than short distances. You walk slowly, conserving energy, your small hand in hers as you navigate the rough path. You pass other families along the way, all heading to market with the same desperate hope. Some are in even worse condition than you. Children who can barely walk, parents who look like walking skeletons. You see a family carrying a child who isn't moving, and you realise with a chill that the child is dead. They're bringing the body to town for burial because they can't afford to bury the child at home. Death and hunger are constant companions in your world. When you reach the market, the competition is fierce. There are dozens of families like yours, all desperate for food, all willing to work for whatever scraps might be available. You watch as stronger, older children are chosen for work while you're passed over. Your small size, which made you useful for certain tasks when you were younger, is now a liability. You're too weak to carry heavy loads, too small to reach high places, too young to be trusted with valuable goods. Your mother manages to get work washing dishes for a merchant, and she's promised a bowl of soup and a piece of bread for her labour. But the work will take all day, and there's no guarantee that the promised food will actually materialise. You've learned not to count on adult promises, especially when those adults are barely surviving themselves. While your mother works, you do what you can to find food. You search through the market refuse, looking for scraps that might be edible. You find a turnip that's mostly rotten, but there are parts that might be salvageable. You eat them immediately, knowing that if you try to save them, older children might take them from you. The turnip is bitter and makes your stomach churn, but it's something. You watch other children who are better fed than you, children from families that have somehow managed to maintain their resources. They eat bread and meat while you watch, and the sight is almost physically painful. You've learned to look away quickly because staring at other people's food is dangerous. It marks you as desperate, and desperate children are often targeted by bullies or worse. A merchant's child drops a piece of fruit and you dive for it immediately, but you're not the only one who saw it fall. 3 other children converge on the same spot and suddenly you're in a fight. Your small fists are no match for the older children, but you fight anyway, driven by the desperation of genuine hunger. You manage to grab a piece of the fruit before you're shoved away, blood running from your nose where an older boy hit you. The piece of fruit is bruised and dirty, but it's the best thing you've tasted in days. The sweet juice fills your mouth, and for a moment, the constant pain in your stomach eases slightly. But the relief is brief, and soon the hunger returns with renewed intensity, made worse by the reminder of what real food tastes like. You learn to move carefully through the market, always watching for opportunities but also for dangers. Vendors will sometimes throw things at children who get too close to their stalls. Guards will beat children who are caught stealing, even if what they're stealing is scraps that would otherwise be thrown away. You learn to be invisible, to move like a shadow, to take only what you can get away with. The social dynamics of hunger are complex and cruel. Children form alliances based on shared desperation, but these alliances are fragile. When food is scarce enough, even close friends will turn on each other. You watch siblings fight over scraps, parents choose to feed one child while another goes hungry. Communities fracture under the pressure of not having enough to survive. You're learning that hunger doesn't just affect your body, it changes your mind too. You find it harder to concentrate, harder to remember things, harder to think clearly. Your personality is shifting, becoming more focused on survival, more suspicious of others, more willing to do things that would have horrified your younger self. Hunger is teaching you to be ruthless, because in a world where resources are scarce, the ruthless are more likely to survive. Late in the day, your mother finishes her work and is given the promised soup and bread. She shares it with you, giving you the larger portion even though she's just as hungry as you are. The soup is thin and the bread is hard, but it's warm food and it represents hope. For a few minutes as you eat, you feel almost human again. But the food is quickly gone, and the hunger returns. You know that tomorrow will bring the same challenge, the same desperate search for enough calories to keep your body functioning. You know that many children in your situation don't survive, that hunger is one of the leading killers of young people in the ancient world. You know that your chances of making it to adulthood are slim, and that even if you do survive, the experience of chronic hunger will have changed you permanently. The walk home is even more difficult than the walk to town. You're tired from the day's activities, still desperately hungry despite the small meal, and your body's beginning to shut down non-essential functions to conserve energy. Your mother carries you part of the way, but she's exhausted too and progress is slow. You pass families camping by the roadside, too weak to make it home before nightfall. Some of them have small fires, around which they huddle for warmth. Others have nothing but the clothes on their backs and the hope that tomorrow might bring better luck. You see children younger than you who are clearly dying, their bodies consuming themselves in the absence of adequate nutrition. When you finally reach home, you collapse onto your sleeping spot, your body aching with fatigue and hunger. Your family gathers around the small fire, and you share what little food you manage to gather during the day. It's not enough. It's never enough. But it's something. You fall asleep with your stomach still cramping, your body still demanding the nutrients it needs to grow and develop. This is your reality. Day after day, week after week, season after season, you fight the same battle against starvation. Sometimes you win small victories, a handful of grain, a piece of fruit, a sip of milk. Sometimes you lose badly, going days without food, watching your body grow weaker, feeling your mind become foggy and confused. The hunger is changing you in ways that go beyond physical development. You're learning to see other people primarily as competition for scarce resources. You're learning to hoard whatever you can find, to lie and steal when necessary, to show no mercy to those weaker than yourself. You're learning that survival often requires you to become the kind of person you once would have feared. But you're also learning incredible resilience. Your body is adapting to survive on remarkably little food. Your mind is developing the kind of focused determination that comes from knowing that every meal might be your last. You're acquiring survival skills that will serve you well if you're lucky enough to live long enough to use them. As you drift off to sleep, your last conscious thought is about food. You dream of meals you've never had, of abundance that exists only in your imagination. But even in your dreams, the hunger follows you. A reminder that in the ancient world, being a child means fighting for survival every single day, one meal at a time. You're 8 years old now, and your body bears the scars of hunger, labour, and the brutal education system of the ancient world. But today, you're about to face perhaps the most terrifying transformation of all. You're going to become a soldier. In your world, childhood and warfare aren't separate concepts. Children don't just witness violence, they participate in it. They're trained for it, and often they die in it. The men come for you at dawn. They're not strangers. One of them is your uncle, another is a neighbour you've known since birth. But today they look different, harder, and when they tell you to come with them, there's no warmth in their voices. You're being conscripted into service, though the concept of choice was never really yours to begin with. In the ancient world, children don't get to decide whether they want to be warriors. They get to decide whether they want to survive the process of becoming one. You're taken to a training ground outside your village, where dozens of other children wait. Some are younger than you. You see boys who can't be more than 6. Their small frames almost comically dwarfed by the wooden weapons they're being given. Others are older, maybe 12 or 13, and they have the lean, scarred look of children who have already seen real combat. This isn't a game or a rite of passage. This is preparation for actual warfare, and everyone present understands that many of you won't survive the training, let alone the battles to come. Your first weapon is a wooden sword that's almost as long as you're tall. The handle is rough and splinters your palms immediately, but you're told that soft hands are a luxury you can't afford. Pain makes you remember, the training master growls as he watches you struggle with the unfamiliar weight. Remember how to hold it. Remember how to swing it. Remember how to kill with it. The word kill hangs in the air like a physical presence. You're 8 years old, and until this moment, your understanding of death has been limited to the natural deaths you've witnessed. Disease, starvation, accidents. Now you're being explicitly trained to cause death, to look another human being in the eye and end their life with purpose and skill. Your training begins with basic movements, but even these are brutal. You're forced to hold the wooden sword extended for hours until your arms scream with exhaustion. When you lower it without permission, you're beaten with a stick across your back. You learn to endure pain while maintaining focus, to ignore your body's desperate pleas for rest, to push through levels of exhaustion that would have seemed impossible just days ago. The other children around you are going through the same transformation. You watch boys who were gentle and kind just weeks ago learn to snarl with aggression, to strike with intent to harm, to view every other person as either an ally or an enemy. The training is deliberately designed to strip away the natural empathy and gentleness of childhood, replacing it with the cold calculation necessary for effective warfare. You're taught to fight in formation, your small body pressed against those of the other child soldiers as you learn to move as a single unit. The concept of individual identity begins to fade as you're moulded into part of a larger war machine. Your personal desires, your individual fears, your unique personality, all of these become secondary to your function as a soldier. The psychological conditioning is as intense as the physical training. You're told stories of glorious battles, of heroes who died young but achieved immortality through their deeds in combat. You're taught to see death in battle not as a tragedy but as an honour, not as an ending but as a transformation into something greater. The natural human fear of death is systematically replaced with a fear of dishonour, of cowardice, of letting down your unit. You learn to use real weapons now, sharp bronze or iron blades that can cut flesh, spear points that can pierce armour, arrows that can kill from a distance. Your small hands, which should be learning to write or create art, instead learn the weight and balance of instruments designed solely for ending life. You practice on straw targets at first, then on captured animals, and finally, in a moment that changes you forever, on enemy prisoners. The first time you're ordered to kill, you hesitate. The prisoner is bound and defenceless, not much older than you are, and his eyes hold the same fear you feel inside yourself. But hesitation in the ancient military is not tolerated. Your training master's blade appears at your throat, and his voice is cold as winter. Kill him, or I kill you both. With shaking hands, you drive your blade into the prisoner's chest. Feel the resistance of flesh and bone. Watch the light fade from his eyes as his blood covers your hands. You vomit afterward, your small body rejecting the horror of what you've just done, but there's no comfort offered, no counselling or support. Instead, you're told that your reaction is weakness leaving your body, that with each kill it will become easier, more natural. And the terrible truth is that they're right. It does become easier. Your world shrinks to the confines of military discipline. You wake when ordered, eat when permitted, sleep when allowed. Your day is structured around weapons training, combat drills, and the gradual erosion of everything that once made you a child. You learn to march long distances while carrying equipment that weighs nearly as much as you do. You learn to sleep on the ground in any weather, to eat whatever food is available without complaint, to endure pain and discomfort without showing weakness. The camaraderie among the child soldiers is intense but cold. You form bonds with the other boys, but these aren't the friendships of childhood. They're the calculated alliances of people who might have to trust each other with their lives. You learn to care for your unit mates, while also understanding that they're expendable, that the mission always comes before individual survival. You're taught tactics and strategy, but always from the perspective of someone expected to follow orders without question. You learn to read battlefield signs, to understand when an attack is coming, to coordinate with other soldiers during combat. Your young mind, which should be learning about literature or mathematics, instead absorbs lessons about killing efficiently and dying with honour. The physical changes in your body are dramatic. The constant training is building muscle and endurance, but it's also stunting your growth in other ways. You're not getting the nutrition needed for healthy development, and the stress of military life is aging you prematurely. You look in reflective surfaces and see a face that's older than your years, harder than it should be, marked by experiences no child should have. Your first real battle comes sooner than expected. Enemy forces have been spotted approaching your territory, and your unit is being deployed as part of the defensive force. You're given real armour now, pieces that don't fit properly because they were made for larger soldiers who have died in previous battles. The metal is heavy and uncomfortable, but it's all that stands between you and the weapons that will soon be aimed at your small body. The night before battle you can't sleep. Around you, other child soldiers are dealing with their fear in different ways. Some pray to whatever gods they believe in, others sharpen their weapons obsessively. A few simply stare into the darkness with the hollow eyes of those who have already accepted their death. You think about your family, about the life you had before military training, about the childhood that now seems like a distant dream. The battle itself is chaos beyond anything your training prepared you for. The noise is overwhelming. Screaming men and horses clashing metal, the wet sounds of weapons finding flesh. Your carefully learned formations dissolve almost immediately as the reality of combat proves far messier than any drill. You find yourself separated from your unit, alone in a field of violence where survival depends on reflexes and luck more than training. The enemy soldier, fully grown and battle-hardened, appears in front of you. For a moment you both freeze. He's clearly as surprised to face a child soldier as you are to face a real enemy. But his hesitation lasts only a second before his weapon swings toward you. You dodge, barely, feeling the wind from his blade brush your face. Your own weapon finds its mark more through desperation than skill, and suddenly you're standing over the body of a man you've killed in actual combat. The battle continues around you, but something fundamental has changed. You're no longer a child who has been trained to be a soldier. You're a soldier who was once a child. The distinction matters because it represents a transformation that can never be undone. You've crossed a line that separates the innocent from the experienced, the protected from the protectors, the civilian from the warrior. When the battle ends, your side has won, though victory feels hollow when you see how many of your fellow child soldiers are among the dead. You're no longer the same person who entered military training just months ago. You've been shaped by violence, moulded by the demands of warfare, transformed into something that would be unrecognisable to your younger self. You look at the other survivors, boys who like you have been forced to grow up far too quickly, and you see your own transformation reflected in their faces. You're all harder now, more careful, more suspicious. You've learned that the world is fundamentally violent, that survival often depends on your willingness to be more violent than those around you. The military doesn't release you after one battle. You're a soldier now, and soldiers serve until they die, or become too injured to fight. Your childhood is officially over, not because you've reached a certain age, but because you've proven you can kill effectively and follow orders without question. You've become an asset in the ancient world's most important industry, warfare. As you settle down to sleep that night, surrounded by the snores and nightmares of other child soldiers, you realise that you can barely remember what it felt like to be innocent. The boy who played simple games and worried about hunger seems like a different person, someone you knew long ago but can no longer really understand. You've been transformed by the ancient world's machinery of violence, and there's no going back. Tomorrow will bring more training, more battles, more opportunities to kill or be killed. You're 8 years old, and you're already a veteran warrior. In the ancient world, this isn't considered tragic, it's considered necessary. Children become soldiers because armies need soldiers, and childhood is a luxury that most societies simply can't afford. You're 10 years old now, battle-tested and hardened by your experiences as a child soldier. But today, You're facing an enemy that no amount of military training can prepare you for: disease. The plague has come to your region, an invisible killer that spreads faster than any army and shows no mercy to the young, the old, or the strong. You're about to learn that in the ancient world, epidemic disease isn't an occasional crisis. It's a constant companion that shapes every aspect of life. It starts with a smell. You notice it first when you wake up. Something sweet and sickening in the air that wasn't there yesterday. It's the smell of death beginning to accumulate in your community, the odour of bodies that are succumbing faster than they can be properly buried. Your military training has made you sensitive to changes in your environment, but this change fills you with a different kind of dread than any enemy army ever could. Your first hint of what's coming is when you see the rats, hundreds of them, fleeing buildings and running through the streets in broad daylight. Animals often sense disease before humans do, and their panic behaviour is a warning that something terrible is approaching. You watch them stream past your quarters, their usually secretive nature abandoned in favour of desperate flight. The first person you see die from the plague is a boy in your unit, someone who shared your training and fought beside you in battle. Yesterday he was complaining about the poor quality of your rations. Today he's burning with fever, his skin covered in dark swellings that seem to pulse with their own malevolent life. You watch him deteriorate over the course of hours, his body racked with pain that makes him scream until his voice gives out. There's no medicine, no treatment, no hope of recovery. The healers in your community have remedies for wounds and broken bones, but they're helpless against this invisible enemy. They try everything they know, herbal poultices, bloodletting, prayers to various gods, but nothing works. The disease follows its own logic, killing seemingly at random while sparing others for reasons no one can understand. You're quarantined with the rest of your unit, but quarantine in the ancient world isn't the organised medical response you might imagine. Instead, you're simply locked in your barracks and left to either survive or die together. Food and water are left outside your door by people who approach no closer than absolutely necessary. The healthy are abandoned to care for the sick with no knowledge of how disease spreads or how to prevent infection. Within your quarantined group, social structures collapse almost immediately. Military discipline means nothing when half your unit is dying in agony and the other half is waiting to see if they'll be next. Some boys try to maintain order, clinging to familiar routines as a way of fighting despair. Others become wild, attacking anyone who comes near them in their fever-induced delirium. A few simply give up, lying down to wait for death with the resignation of those who have seen too much suffering. You realise that you might be infected when the fever starts. It begins as a mild warmth, almost pleasant after the cold of recent nights. But within hours it becomes a burning heat that makes your skin feel like it's on fire. Your head pounds with a pain unlike anything you've experienced, worse than hunger, worse than battle wounds, worse than the beatings of your training. This is your body fighting a war it cannot win. The hallucinations come next. Your fevered mind creates visions that are more real than reality. You see dead friends calling to you, watch walls melt and reform, hear voices giving you orders that make no sense. You understand now why some plague victims become violent. When your brain can't distinguish between fantasy and reality, every person around you becomes a potential threat or enemy. But somehow, mysteriously, you begin to recover. The fever breaks after what feels like days but might have been only hours. The swellings on your body begin to shrink. You're one of the lucky ones. Perhaps 1 in 3 who will survive this particular outbreak. Your survival isn't due to superior medical care or your own strength. It's simply random chance, the biological lottery that determines who lives and who dies during epidemic disease. Recovery brings its own horrors. You're weak and disoriented, but you're aware enough to see what has happened around you. More than half of your unit is dead, their bodies stacked in the corner of the barracks because there's no one healthy enough to carry them out for burial. The smell is overwhelming, death and disease and human waste creating an atmosphere that makes breathing difficult. The survivors are barely functional. Those who lived through the disease are left with permanent damage. Some have lost their hearing, others can't walk properly, many show signs of brain damage that will affect them for the rest of their lives. You've all been changed by the experience, marked by survival in ways that go beyond physical scars. When the quarantine is finally lifted and you're allowed to leave the barracks, you discover that your entire community has been devastated. Families have been wiped out completely. Businesses and workshops stand empty, their owners dead and no one left alive who knows their trades. Children wander the streets looking for parents who will never return. The social fabric that held your community together has been shredded by disease. The dead are everywhere. There aren't enough healthy people left to handle proper burials, so bodies are simply stacked in mass graves or burned in huge pyres that fill the air with smoke and ash. You help with this grim work, your small hands carrying the bodies of people you once knew, people who were alive and talking just days ago. Death has become so common that you're developing the emotional numbness necessary to function around constant mortality. Food becomes critically scarce because the farmers and food merchants are dead. The complex systems that brought food to your community have collapsed, and nobody knows how to rebuild them quickly enough to prevent mass starvation. You find yourself fighting the same battle against hunger that defined your early childhood, but now it's complicated by the aftermath of disease and the breakdown of social order. You notice that your own behaviour has changed since recovering from the plague. You're more reckless than before, more willing to take dangerous risks. This isn't courage. It's the psychological response of someone who has faced their own mortality and survived. You've learned that death can come without warning or reason, so the normal human instinct for self-preservation has been damaged. Why avoid danger when safety is ultimately an illusion? The other survivors show similar changes. Some become obsessively focused on cleanliness, washing themselves compulsively, as if they can prevent future disease through ritual purification. Others become fatalistic, taking no precautions at all because they believe their fate is already determined. Many develop a kind of survivor's guilt, wondering why they lived when so many others died, questioning whether their survival means anything or whether they're simply waiting for the next plague to claim them. New outbreaks are constant. Just as your community begins to recover from one disease, another appears. Smallpox, dysentery, typhus, bubonic plague. These aren't just historical terms, they're the ongoing reality of life in the ancient world. You learn to recognise the early signs of different diseases, to understand which ones kill quickly and which ones drag out the suffering, to calculate your chances of survival based on symptoms and patterns you've observed. You become a kind of expert in death. You can tell how long someone has been dead by looking at their body. You know which diseases are most contagious and how to minimise your exposure. You understand the social dynamics of plague communities, how fear makes people cruel, how desperation leads to breakdown of normal moral boundaries, how survival often requires you to abandon others who might be saved with more resources. Children are especially vulnerable to disease, and you watch younger ones die in numbers that would be unimaginable in the modern world. Their small bodies simply can't fight off infections that might only make adults sick. You see entire families lose all their children in a matter of days, parents driven mad by grief and loss. You understand that your own survival to age 10 makes you remarkably lucky by ancient standards. The psychological impact of living with constant disease goes beyond individual trauma. Your entire generation is being shaped by the understanding that death is random, swift, and always present. This creates a worldview that's fundamentally different from modern perspectives on life and mortality. You learn to form relationships quickly but lightly, because anyone you care about might be dead tomorrow. You learn to live in the present moment because planning for the future seems pointless when survival is so uncertain. Religious beliefs become more intense during plague years. People pray more desperately, make larger sacrifices to the gods, create new rituals designed to ward off disease. But they also become more suspicious of religious authority when prayers fail to prevent death. You see communities torn apart by competing explanations for why the plague has come. Is it punishment for sin, a test of faith, or simply random misfortune? Different answers lead to different behaviours, and sometimes to violence between groups who blame each other for bringing divine wrath. Medical knowledge advances slowly during plague years, but not through systematic study. Instead, people learn through trial and error, desperate experimentation and careful observation of what works and what doesn't. You pick up fragments of useful information, certain herbs that might ease symptoms, isolation techniques that sometimes prevent spread, ways of caring for the sick that improve their chances of survival. But mostly you learn that medicine in the ancient world is primitive and limited. As you settle down to sleep another night in a plague-torn community, surrounded by the sounds of suffering and the constant threat of your own death, you realise that disease has become as much a part of your identity as warfare or hunger. You're not just a child who has survived plague. You're a plague survivor, marked by the experience in ways that will affect every decision you make for the rest of your life. The ancient world doesn't offer counselling or therapy for trauma. Instead, you're expected to simply continue functioning, to contribute to whatever community manages to survive, to carry the psychological scars of constant mortality without complaint. You're 10 years old, and you've already seen more death than most modern adults will witness in their entire lives. Tomorrow might bring another outbreak, another wave of death that could claim you or everyone you care about. But tonight, you're alive, and in the plague years of the ancient world, being alive at the end of any day is already a significant victory. You're 12 years old now, and everything you think you know about yourself is about to be shattered. You've survived hunger, brutal education, military service, and plague. But today you're discovering the most fundamental truth about your existence in the ancient world. You are not free. You never have been. You're a slave, born into bondage, and everything you've experienced so far has been preparation for a lifetime of servitude. Today, you're being sold. The realization comes gradually, then all at once. You've always known that your family was different from some others in your community, that you had fewer rights and options than certain children. But you attributed this to poverty, to low social status, to the general hardships that affect everyone in the ancient world. You never understood that your very existence was considered property, that your body and labour belonged to someone else by law and custom. Your current owner, you're only now learning to think of him in these terms, has fallen on hard times. The wars and plagues that have devastated your region have also affected his wealth, and he needs money more than he needs the children he owns. Your valuable property, young enough to have many years of labour ahead of you, old enough to be useful immediately, hardened by your experiences into someone who can endure difficult conditions without breaking. The slave market is unlike anything you've ever experienced. You're stripped naked and displayed alongside dozens of other human beings, your body examined by potential buyers as if you were livestock. Men and women probe your muscles, check your teeth, test your reflexes, and discuss your value in terms that reduce you to purely economic calculations. The humiliation is complete and deliberate. You're being taught that your humanity is irrelevant, that you exist solely for the benefit of others. A buyer examines the scars on your back from your military training and nods with approval. "This one's been properly disciplined," he says to his companion. "Won't need much breaking in." You realise that all the suffering you've endured, all the hardships that have shaped you, are being viewed as advantages that make you more valuable as property. Your pain has been transformed into profit for others. You're purchased by a man who owns a large household in a distant city. The price paid for you is equivalent to what a skilled craftsman might earn in several months. You're expensive property, which means your new owner will expect a significant return on his investment. You're chained to other newly purchased slaves and marched away from everything you've ever known, beginning a journey to a life that will be defined entirely by the needs and desires of your owner. The march to your new home takes weeks. You're part of a group of about 20 slaves of various ages, all bound together by chains that allow you to walk but prevent escape. The older slaves in your group have been through this before. They've been bought and sold multiple times, and they understand the system in ways that you're only beginning to learn. They teach you the unspoken rules of survival in slavery. "Never look the master directly in the eyes," an older boy whispers to you during a rest stop. "Never speak unless spoken to. Never complain about anything, ever. And never ever try to run. They'll hunt you down and the punishment will be worse than death." You listen carefully, understanding that this advice might determine whether you live or die in your new situation. You learn about the hierarchy among slaves, House slaves, who work inside the master's home, have better conditions but also face different dangers. Field slaves work in brutal conditions but have less direct contact with the owners. Skilled slaves, craftsmen, scribes, entertainers, have some privileges but are also held to higher standards. You don't know yet which category you'll fall into, but you understand that your assignment will determine the nature of your suffering for years to come. When you arrive at your new home, you're immediately processed like any other piece of property. You're given a new name — slaves don't get to keep their birth names — and assigned a number that will be branded onto your shoulder. The branding iron is heated in a fire while you watch, and when it's pressed into your flesh, the pain is beyond description. But worse than the physical agony is the psychological impact. You've been literally marked as property. Your skin permanently altered to show your status as someone else's possession. Your new master's household is large and complex. There are dozens of slaves with different roles and responsibilities, creating a miniature society within slavery. You're assigned to work in the kitchens, which means long hours, hot conditions, and constant supervision. Your small size is an advantage for certain tasks. You can reach into narrow spaces, crawl under equipment for cleaning, and handle delicate work that requires dexterity. The work begins before dawn and continues until after dark. You're awakened by other slaves and immediately put to work preparing food for the master's family and their guests. There are no breaks, no time off, no consideration for your age or physical limitations. You work when you're sick, when you're injured, when you're exhausted beyond endurance. The concept of childhood as a time for rest and play simply doesn't exist in your world. Food is scarce and poor quality. Slaves eat only after the master's family has finished their meals, and you receive whatever scraps and leftovers remain. Often this isn't enough to meet your nutritional needs, especially given the physical demands of your work. You're constantly hungry, but complaining about food is one of the offences that can result in severe punishment. You witness punishments regularly, and they're designed to be educational as well as painful. When a slave is caught stealing food, he's whipped in front of all the other slaves while the master explains exactly why this behaviour cannot be tolerated. When a house slave breaks an expensive piece of pottery, she's forced to work double shifts for a month while eating half rations. The message is clear. Any mistake, any sign of rebellion, any failure to meet expectations will result in suffering that serves as a lesson to everyone else. The psychological conditioning of slavery is as important as the physical control. You're taught to think of yourself as fundamentally different from free people, inherently inferior and deserving of your situation. The master's children, who are close to your age, treat you with casual cruelty that they've learned from watching adults. They order you around, hit you when they're frustrated, and never consider that you might have feelings or desires of your own. You develop survival strategies that require you to split your personality. Externally, you become the perfect slave, obedient, humble, grateful for any small kindness. Internally, you maintain a small core of selfhood that you hide from everyone around you. This psychological split is necessary for survival, but it's also deeply damaging. You're learning to live as two different people, the slave that others see and the person you secretly remain. Escape is theoretically possible, but practically impossible. Even if you could break free from the household, you're in a foreign city where you don't know the language or customs. You have no money, no friends, no resources, and your branded skin marks you immediately as runaway property. The penalties for helping escaped slaves are severe, so even sympathetic people are unlikely to assist you. Most importantly, you have nowhere to go. Your original family was probably enslaved as well, scattered to different owners across the region. You watch older slaves who have been in the system for decades and you see what your future looks like. They've been broken in ways that go beyond physical damage. Their spirits have been crushed so thoroughly that they can't even imagine freedom anymore. They've internalized their status as property, accepting it not just as their reality, but as their natural condition. They police other slaves more effectively than any overseer, reporting infractions and enforcing discipline because the system has convinced them that this is their proper role. But you also see moments of resistance and humanity that give you hope. Slaves secretly share food with each other when someone is sick. They create hidden languages and codes that allow them to communicate without their owner's understanding. They maintain traditions and stories from their original cultures, passing them down quietly to preserve some connection to their lost identities. The sexual abuse of young slaves is common and systematic. You're old enough now to understand what's happening to some of the other children in the household, and you live in constant fear that you might be next. There's no protection, no recourse, no way to resist without facing punishment that could include death. You learn to make yourself invisible when possible, to avoid being alone with certain members of the master's family, to develop instincts for situations that might be dangerous. Your body's changing as you enter adolescence, but these changes are viewed only in terms of how they affect your value as property. You're becoming stronger, which means you can handle heavier work. You're developing adult features, which creates different kinds of vulnerability. Your growth and development are monitored not with parental care, but with economic calculation. How can these changes be exploited for maximum benefit to your owner? Education is limited to what makes you more useful as a slave. You learn to read and write only enough to follow written instructions or keep simple records. You're taught skills related to your assigned work, but never given knowledge that might make you more independent or questioning. Information is carefully controlled to keep you functional but not empowered. The master's family treats you with a casual indifference that people show toward useful objects. You're fed because hungry slaves work poorly. You're given basic medical care because dead slaves have no value. You're housed because valuable property needs to be protected from weather and theft. But these necessities are provided without warmth, affection, or recognition of your humanity. You begin to understand that slavery affects not just individual slaves, but entire societies. The economy of your region depends on slave labour. The lifestyle of free families is built on the unpaid work of people like you. The culture itself has been shaped by the normalisation of human ownership, creating social structures and moral systems that support and justify the exploitation of human beings. As you lie down to sleep on your thin mat in the slave quarters, surrounded by the quiet breathing of the other people who share your situation, you realise that this is likely to be your life until you die. You might be sold again, passed from owner to owner like any other piece of property. You might have children who will automatically become slaves themselves. You might live for decades without ever experiencing a single day of freedom. But somehow, despite everything designed to break your spirit, something inside you refuses to be completely extinguished. You're 12 years old, you're owned by another human being, and your childhood has been defined by suffering that most people couldn't endure. Yet you're still here, still thinking, still maintaining some sense of yourself as a person, rather than just property. In the ancient world, millions of children share your situation. Slavery is so common that it's simply accepted as a natural part of life. You're not unique in your suffering. You're part of a vast system of human exploitation that spans continents and centuries. But you're also part of the human capacity for endurance, the ability to survive conditions that should destroy the spirit and somehow maintain hope for something better. You're 14 years old now, and you've survived longer than most children in the ancient world. You've endured hunger, violence, disease, and slavery. But today, you're going to confront perhaps the most devastating reality of all. The deliberate cruelty that adults inflict on children not out of necessity, but out of choice. You're about to witness and experience the systematic destruction of innocence that occurs when societies decide that children are expendable. The day begins like many others in your life as a slave, but there's an unusual tension in the household. Your master has received visitors, important men from the temple who speak in hushed tones about religious obligations and divine requirements. You catch fragments of their conversation as you work. The gods demand sacrifice. Children are purest. The harvest depends on it. You don't yet understand what these words mean for you personally, but something in the adult's behaviour tells you that danger is approaching. Your master calls you away from your usual work and takes you to a part of the house you've never seen before. The room is decorated with religious symbols and contains an altar stained with dark marks that you instinctively recognise as dried blood. Several other child slaves are already there, all of them looking as confused and frightened as you feel. The adults around you wear ceremonial robes and speak in the formal language reserved for religious rituals. You're being prepared for sacrifice. Not because you've done anything wrong, not because you're sick or injured, but because the adults in your society believe that killing children will appease their gods and ensure good fortune. Your life, which has already been difficult beyond imagination, is about to end not through accident or disease, but through the deliberate decision of people who have convinced themselves that your death serves a higher purpose. The preparation rituals are elaborate and terrifying. You're bathed in special water, dressed in white robes, and given food that's better than anything you've eaten in years, because sacrificial victims must be pure and well treated before their deaths. The irony is devastating. You're finally receiving care and attention, but only because you're about to be killed. The adults speak to you gently, almost kindly, as they prepare you for slaughter. But this particular sacrifice is interrupted by news of approaching enemy armies. The priests decide that the gods have already answered their prayers by sending a military threat that will test the community's strength. You and the other children are returned to your regular duties, your lives spared not by mercy or compassion, but by changing religious interpretation. You've looked directly into the face of adult-sanctioned murder and somehow escaped, but the experience has changed you permanently. You begin to notice other forms of systematic cruelty that you previously accepted as normal. Child abandonment is common in your world. When families can't afford to feed all their children, the youngest or weakest are simply left in remote locations to die from exposure. You see parents making these decisions with resignation rather than anguish, their emotions numbed by repeated exposure to impossible choices. The practice of infanticide is even more direct. Newborn babies who are female, disabled, or simply unwanted are killed immediately after birth. Sometimes they're drowned, sometimes left outside to freeze, sometimes their necks are simply broken. This isn't considered murder, it's considered practical family planning. You watch women give birth, knowing that they might have to kill their own children within hours, and you see how this knowledge hardens them against natural maternal feelings. You witness the selling of children into prostitution, watching boys and girls younger than yourself purchased specifically for sexual exploitation. The adults involved in these transactions discuss the children's physical attributes and potential earning capacity with the same casual tone they might use to evaluate livestock. The children being sold often don't understand what's happening to them until it's too late to resist or escape. Educational cruelty reaches new levels of sophistication as you observe the training of children for specialized forms of entertainment. Young boys are deliberately stunted through malnutrition and confined spaces to create adult dwarfs for the amusement of wealthy households. Girls are trained as dancers through methods that involve breaking bones and reshaping their bodies in ways that ensure they'll never be able to function normally but will create the exaggerated movements that audiences find entertaining. You see children being used in gladiatorial contests, forced to fight each other or wild animals for the entertainment of adult spectators. These aren't accidental deaths, or even necessary violence. They're deliberate spectacles designed to amuse people who have become so desensitized to suffering that they require increasingly extreme forms of cruelty to feel entertained. You watch children your own age die in agony, while crowds cheer and place bets on the outcomes. The psychological manipulation of children by adults reaches levels of cruelty that go beyond physical abuse. You observe children being systematically turned against their own families, trained to spy on and report the activities of their parents and siblings. The adults who organize these systems understand exactly how to exploit the natural trust and loyalty of children, using these qualities to destroy the very relationships that should provide security and love. Religious authorities use children in ways that combine spiritual abuse with physical and sexual exploitation. You see young temple servants who have been conditioned to believe that serving the sexual desires of priests is a holy duty. Children who have been taught that their suffering brings them closer to their gods. The adults responsible for this abuse use religious language to justify actions that they know are harmful, creating systems of exploitation that are protected by claims of divine authority. You witness the deliberate creation of disabled children for specific purposes. Some babies are intentionally blinded because blind children are considered more effective beggars, generating more sympathy and money from passers-by. Others have their limbs broken and allowed to heal incorrectly, creating deformities that make them more pitiable and therefore more profitable for their owners. These practices aren't accidents or unfortunate outcomes. They're calculated business decisions that treat children as raw materials to be shaped for maximum economic benefit. The training of child assassins represents perhaps the most sophisticated form of psychological abuse you encounter. Young children are systematically broken down and rebuilt as emotionless killers, their natural empathy and moral development deliberately destroyed through techniques that would be recognized as torture in any humane society. You see these children walking through your community, superficially normal, but internally hollowed out, transformed into weapons that adults can aim at their enemies. You observe the use of children as human shields during warfare, not just as collateral damage, but as deliberate strategy. Military commanders position children in front of their troops, knowing that enemy forces will hesitate to attack positions that contain obvious non-combatants. When children are killed in these situations, the commanders express no remorse. They've achieved their tactical objective of forcing the enemy to make difficult moral choices. The practice of debt slavery, specifically targeting children, reveals new depths of calculated cruelty. Families that owe money are forced to give up their children as collateral, and these children are then worked under conditions designed to ensure that the debt can never be repaid. The system is deliberately structured to create permanent bondage, transforming temporary financial difficulties into lifelong enslavement for the most vulnerable family members. You see children being used in mining operations, their small bodies perfect for crawling through narrow tunnels and working in spaces that adults can't access. The work is incredibly dangerous. Cave-ins, toxic gases and accidents are common. But children are considered more expendable than adults. When child miners die, they're simply replaced with new children, and the work continues without pause or consideration for the lives lost. The deliberate starvation of children for entertainment purposes represents a form of cruelty that combines physical abuse with psychological torture. You witness events where wealthy adults gather to watch children compete for small amounts of food, laughing at the desperation and degradation of young people who are willing to do anything to avoid death by hunger. These spectacles aren't born from scarcity. They're created artificially by people who have enough resources to feed everyone present but choose not to. Medical experimentation on children occurs without any consideration for consent or welfare. You see children being used to test new surgical techniques, new medicines, new treatments, with no regard for their survival or long-term health. The adults conducting these experiments view children as ideal test subjects because they're available, powerless, and considered less valuable than adults. The systematic separation of children from their families serves multiple cruel purposes. Beyond the economic benefits of selling children into slavery or forced labour, this practice is used as a form of psychological warfare against entire communities. Adults understand that nothing causes more suffering than the loss of children, so child theft becomes a tool of terror used to break the spirit of enemy populations. As the days pass following your near sacrifice, you begin to recognize the sophisticated systems that adults have created to justify and organize their cruelty toward children. These aren't random acts of violence born from desperation. They're carefully constructed institutions with rules, hierarchies and procedures designed to maximize the exploitation of young people while minimizing adult guilt. The religious establishment has developed elaborate theological frameworks that transform child abuse into sacred duty. Temple schools teach that children's suffering purifies their souls and brings them closer to divine truth. Sacred texts are interpreted to support practices that would horrify any rational observer, but the adults involved have convinced themselves that they're performing holy work. You watch priests who genuinely believe they're saving children's souls while systematically destroying their bodies and minds. Legal systems have been crafted to ensure that children have no recourse against adult cruelty. Courts refuse to hear testimony from anyone under a certain age, claiming that children are inherently unreliable witnesses to their own abuse. Laws specifically exempt parents, masters, and religious authorities from prosecution for actions that would be considered serious crimes if committed against adults. The concept of children having rights independent of adult interests simply doesn't exist in your legal framework. Economic structures depend so heavily on child exploitation that entire industries would collapse without access to young workers. Mining operations, textile production, agricultural work and domestic service all rely on children who can be forced to work longer hours for less compensation than adults would accept. The adults who profit from these systems have convinced themselves that they're providing valuable training and character development rather than exploitation. Educational institutions designed specifically to break children's spirits operate openly in your society. Military academies that transform boys into emotionless killers are celebrated as character-building experiences. Training centres that teach girls to accept sexual abuse as normal are praised for preparing them for adult responsibilities. These establishments have developed sophisticated techniques for psychological manipulation that would be recognised as torture in any humane society. What disturbs you most profoundly is discovering that much of the cruelty inflicted on children is not hidden or shameful, but openly celebrated by adult society. Public festivals feature children being tortured for entertainment, with crowds cheering the most creative forms of abuse. Religious ceremonies incorporate child sacrifice as moments of divine communion that bring entire communities together in shared spiritual experience. Wealthy families compete to display the most creative forms of child exploitation, turning suffering into a mark of social status. Owning children who have been deliberately deformed for entertainment purposes becomes a symbol of wealth and sophistication. Training children to perform increasingly dangerous stunts for public amusement is seen as artistic achievement worthy of admiration and respect. Military leaders who successfully use child soldiers are honoured as tactical geniuses who maximise available resources. Merchants who develop new methods for exploiting child labour are celebrated as innovative business leaders who advance economic prosperity. Religious authorities who devise novel forms of spiritual abuse are revered as holy men who deepen their community's connection to the divine. You realise that the adults around you don't see children as human beings deserving protection. They see them as resources to be utilised, entertainment to be consumed, or obstacles to be eliminated. The concept that children might have inherent worth, independent of their utility to adults, is not just foreign but actively threatening to the social structures that define your world. Perhaps most terrifying is the way that extreme cruelty becomes normalised through constant exposure. Actions that would shock and horrify someone encountering them for the first time become routine background features of daily life. Children being beaten to death in public squares barely draws attention from passers-by who have seen similar scenes countless times before. The systematic rape of children by religious authorities is discussed as casually as weather patterns, something unpleasant but inevitable that doesn't merit strong emotional reactions. Parents selling their children into sexual slavery speak about these transactions with the same detached tone they might use to discuss livestock sales. Communities organising child sacrifice festivals approach the planning with the same practical attention to detail they'd apply to any other public event. This normalisation occurs through gradual exposure that desensitises people to increasing levels of horror. Children who grow up witnessing extreme cruelty develop psychological defences that prevent them from feeling appropriate shock and revulsion. Adults who participate in or benefit from systematic abuse convince themselves that these practices are natural, necessary, or even beneficial for the children involved. You watch this process happening within yourself, recognising that experiences which would have traumatised your younger self now seem merely unpleasant rather than horrific. Your capacity for moral outrage has been systematically eroded through exposure to cruelty so consistent and pervasive that it becomes your baseline expectation for how children are treated. Most devastating is witnessing how the natural bonds between adults and children become twisted into instruments of abuse. Parents who genuinely love their children convince themselves that inflicting pain is necessary for proper development. They beat their children with tears in their eyes, believing that cruelty in childhood will prepare them for an even crueler adult world. Teachers who care about their students' futures use increasingly harsh methods to ensure learning, convinced that children who aren't taught through pain will be unable to function in a world where pain is constant. Masters who view their young slaves with genuine affection nonetheless exploit them ruthlessly, believing that learning to endure abuse will ultimately benefit the children's character development. Religious leaders who have devoted their lives to serving what they believe are divine purposes use their spiritual authority to justify actions they know cause suffering, convinced that temporary earthly pain brings eternal spiritual benefit. Military commanders who take pride in training effective soldiers systematically destroy the humanity of children under their care, believing that this destruction is necessary for creating warriors capable of defending their communities. You see how love itself becomes corrupted when it exists within systems designed to exploit children. Adults learn to express their care through cruelty, their protection through harm, their nurturing through destruction. The natural impulses that should protect children are redirected into channels that serve adult interests while convincing the adults involved that they're acting in the children's best interests. You begin to understand that much of the cruelty inflicted on children isn't driven by necessity, desperation, or even ignorance. Instead, it's the result of deliberate choices made by adults who have convinced themselves that children exist primarily to serve adult needs and desires. The ancient world has created elaborate justifications for treating children as property, as entertainment, as disposable resources, but underneath these justifications is simply the raw exercise of power over those too small and weak to resist. As you lie down to sleep, your mind struggling to process the systematic cruelty you've witnessed and experienced, you realize that you've learned something terrible about human nature. Adults are capable of inflicting suffering on children not just when they're forced to by circumstances, but when they choose to for reasons of profit, entertainment, religion, or simple convenience. You've seen the complete absence of the protective instincts that should govern adult behavior toward children. You're 14 years old, and you've witnessed forms of cruelty that would challenge the comprehension of most adults in the modern world. You've seen children treated as sacrificial offerings, entertainment commodities, sexual objects, disposable labour, and experimental subjects. You've learned that in the ancient world, childhood isn't just dangerous because of natural threats. It's dangerous because the adults who should be protecting children are often the ones inflicting the greatest harm. But somehow, despite everything you've seen and experienced, something inside you still recognizes that these things are wrong. Your capacity for moral judgment has survived even systematic exposure to institutionalized cruelty. You understand that the adults around you have chosen to become monsters, and that their choices don't define what human beings are capable of. They only define what some human beings choose to do when they have power over others and no external constraints on their behavior. Tomorrow will bring new horrors, new examples of how completely adults can abandon their responsibility to protect the young. But tonight, as you drift into uneasy sleep, you carry within yourself the knowledge that survival is possible even in the face of systematic cruelty, and that the spark of human decency can endure even when surrounded by institutional evil. You're 16 years old now, and by the standards of the ancient world you're officially an adult. You've survived everything that killed most of your peers: hunger, disease, violence, exploitation, and systematic cruelty. But survival hasn't left you unchanged. As you look at yourself and the other survivors around you, you begin to understand that the children who make it to adulthood in the ancient world bear scars that go far deeper than anything visible on their bodies. Your reflection in still water shows a face that's aged beyond its years. The eyes staring back carry a haunted wariness that belongs on someone decades older. Your body tells the story of your experiences through an intricate map of scars, burns, and calluses, each mark a lesson learned through pain. Missing teeth speak of malnutrition and violence, while the slave brand on your shoulder proclaims your status as property. Yet these visible wounds pale beside the invisible architecture of damage that governs every thought and feeling. The concept of innocence has become foreign to you, like a word in a language you never learned. Where other children might have developed a natural curiosity about the world, You developed an exhausting vigilance that never sleeps. Every stranger represents potential danger. Every kindness masks possible manipulation. Every peaceful moment threatens to become a trap. This constant alertness preserved your life countless times, but it also erected walls between you and any possibility of true connection with another human being. Emotions have become tools rather than experiences. Fear alerts you to danger, but never overwhelms you completely. Anger provides energy for fighting, but dissipates quickly when no longer useful. Sadness is suppressed before it can weaken your resolve. Joy, wonder, and love exist only as distant concepts you've heard described but never truly felt. You operate within a narrow band of carefully controlled responses that prioritize function over feeling, efficiency over experience. Among your fellow survivors, each carries their own distinctive pattern of adaptation. Marcus moves through the world like a weapon seeking a target, his gladiatorial training having transformed him into someone who can only communicate through displays of dominance. Physical confrontation feels natural to him. Emotional intimacy represents uncharted and threatening territory that he instinctively avoids. Sarah has mastered the art of disconnection, her mind floating somewhere above and apart from her physical form during moments of stress or abuse. This mental escape saved her sanity during years of exploitation, but now she struggles to inhabit her own body even during safe moments. Physical sensation has become the enemy, something to be avoided rather than experienced. David treats the world as a contaminated space requiring constant purification rituals that consume hours of each day. His obsessive behaviours once helped him avoid deadly infections, but they've evolved into compulsions that imprison him within routines that serve no practical purpose. He's trapped by the very strategies that kept him alive. The adult world around you operates according to the same brutal logic that shaped your childhood. Those in positions of authority aren't evil by choice. They're damaged individuals recreating the only systems they understand. The overseer who beats disobedient workers was once a beaten child. The merchant who exploits desperate families was once exploited himself. The priest who demands painful sacrifices learned to associate suffering with divine favour during his own brutal religious education. This creates a civilization built upon the assumption that humans require harsh control to function properly. Children must be broken before they can be useful. Workers need constant surveillance to remain productive. Citizens require severe punishments to maintain order. These beliefs become self-fulfilling prophecies because they create the very conditions that make harsh control seem necessary. Your society's economic foundations rest entirely upon the exploitation of those too young or weak to resist. Slave markets thrive because traumatized adults see nothing wrong with treating children as commodities. Military forces depend on child soldiers because adults who are forced into early warfare view this as normal preparation for life. Religious institutions demand young sacrifices because leaders who survive similar experiences believe suffering brings divine blessing. Survival transformed you into someone fundamentally different from who you might have become under better circumstances. Your intelligence developed along narrow channels focused on threat assessment rather than creative exploration. Where another child might have learned to appreciate beauty, you learned to evaluate tactical advantages. Where others developed artistic sensibilities, you acquired skills in deception and combat. Your mind became a finely tuned instrument for staying alive in hostile environments, but this specialization came at the cost of broader human development. The cruelty you now display toward others isn't born from malice, but from necessity made habitual. When younger children make errors, you correct them with the same harsh methods that taught you, believing this prepares them for an unforgiving world. Power over weaker individuals feels natural because it replicates the only social dynamics you've experienced. Mercy seems like dangerous self-indulgence that could get everyone killed when resources are scarce and threats are constant. The idea of childhood as a protected space for growth and learning strikes you as not just impossible, but actively harmful. Children who grow up sheltered would be helpless when faced with real danger. The concept of allowing young people to develop at their own pace seems wasteful when survival requires immediate contribution to family welfare. Creating safe environments where children can play and explore feels like a luxury that would ultimately weaken them for adult responsibilities. Your relationships with other people are shaped by the understanding that everyone is fundamentally alone, and that cooperation is always temporary and conditional. You've learned to form alliances based on mutual benefit rather than affection, to trade favours rather than give gifts, to evaluate every interaction in terms of what you gain or lose. The possibility of unconditional love or genuine friendship seems like a dangerous fantasy. You realise that you've never experienced play in the way children should. Every activity in your life has been directed towards survival, productivity, or avoiding punishment. You don't know how to engage in activities purely for enjoyment because enjoyment was never a priority or possibility. This absence of play has affected your creativity, your problem-solving abilities, and your capacity for humour and lightness. Your understanding of authority is based entirely on fear and force. You obey those who are stronger than you and expect obedience from those who are weaker. The concept of leadership based on wisdom, compassion, or mutual respect is foreign to you. You've never seen authority exercised for the benefit of those under it, only for the benefit of those who wield it. The survivors who have made it to your age share certain characteristics that enabled them to endure what others couldn't. You're all incredibly tough, resourceful, and adaptable. You can function under conditions that would break people who grew up with security and comfort. You can make difficult decisions quickly, endure pain without complaint, and survive on minimal resources. But these survival traits come with costs that affect every aspect of your adult life. Your toughness makes it difficult for you to accept help or show vulnerability. Your resourcefulness includes a willingness to exploit others that makes genuine cooperation difficult. Your adaptability means that you have trouble forming stable attachments or maintaining consistent values. You see older adults in your community who survived their own brutal childhoods decades ago, and you understand what your future probably holds. They're functional but damaged, capable of maintaining the basic structures of society, but incapable of creating the kind of world where children could be safe and happy. They've built a civilization that perpetuates the conditions that created them. The intergenerational transmission of trauma is so complete in your world that most people don't even recognize it as trauma. The adults around you speak of their childhood experiences as character building, as necessary preparation for adult life, as normal and inevitable aspects of human development. They've convinced themselves that suffering makes people stronger, rather than recognizing how it breaks them. You realize that your entire generation carries wounds that will never fully heal. The children who survive to become adults are walking repositories of accumulated damage, and they'll pass that damage on to the next generation because they don't know any other way to live. The cycle continues not because people are evil, but because broken people create broken systems that break more people. As the weeks pass in your new adult life, you find that certain memories haunt you with increasing intensity. You remember the first time you killed someone in battle, when you were only 8 years old. The image of that enemy soldier's face as the life left his eyes has burned itself into your mind so deeply that you see it every time you close your eyes. But what disturbs you more than the memory of killing is the realization that you felt nothing when it happened. No guilt, no sorrow, no horror. The capacity for those emotions had already been beaten out of you. You remember your younger sister who died during one of the plague outbreaks when she was only 5 years old. You held her small body as she burned with fever, watched her beg for water that you couldn't provide, listened to her cry for your mother who had already died days earlier. But you couldn't comfort her because you had never learned how to comfort anyone, including yourself. You simply waited for her to die, because that's what children did in your world. They waited for death to claim the weak ones while the strong ones prepared to survive another day. The memories of hunger are perhaps the most persistent. You can still feel the gnawing emptiness in your stomach that was your constant companion for years, the way your body consumed itself when there was no food available, the desperate scramble for scraps that might keep you alive another day. Even now, when food is more readily available, you can't bring yourself to eat just one portion. You hoard food obsessively, hiding pieces of bread and dried meat in secret places around your living space, because the fear of starvation never truly leaves your body. You remember the beatings with perfect clarity, Not just the physical pain, but the psychological lesson each one was meant to teach. The switching you received for speaking out of turn taught you that your thoughts and opinions were worthless. The whipping you got for crying when you were hurt taught you that showing pain was weakness. The beating you endured for trying to help another child taught you that compassion was dangerous. Each punishment was designed to strip away another piece of your natural humanity, and the terrible truth is that they worked. You've developed a way of speaking that reflects your experiences. Your words are carefully chosen, economical, designed to convey information without revealing vulnerability. You never speak about your feelings because feelings were always used against you. You never make requests because asking for things led to disappointment or punishment. You never express preferences because preferences were considered selfish luxury. When other survivors speak to you, you understand the subtext beneath their words. When Marcus says, "I'm fine," you know he means I'm in pain, but showing it would make me a target. When Sarah says, "It doesn't matter," you know she means it matters desperately, but caring about it will destroy me. When David says, "I need to clean this," you know he means, "I'm terrified of contamination and death, and this ritual is the only thing that makes me feel safe." You've all learned to communicate in code, to express your deepest needs and fears through actions rather than words. You share food not because you're generous, but because you understand hunger. You stand guard while others sleep, not because you're protective, but because you understand vulnerability. You work together on difficult tasks, not because you enjoy cooperation, but because you understand that survival sometimes requires alliances. Your daily routines are shaped by the trauma you've survived. You wake before dawn not because you're an early riser, but because being alert for danger has become an unbreakable habit. You eat quickly and efficiently, not because you're in a hurry, but because taking time to enjoy food feels dangerous and wrong. You sleep lightly and fitfully, not because you're not tired, but because deep sleep leaves you vulnerable to threats that might materialize at any moment. You check your belongings obsessively, counting and recounting your few possessions, because losing anything could mean the difference between survival and death. You test the sharpness of your blade every morning, not because you expect to use it, but because a dull weapon could get you killed. You survey your surroundings constantly, noting escape routes and potential threats, because situational awareness has been burned into your nervous system through years of genuine danger. Your body moves differently than it should. You walk quietly out of habit, keeping to shadows and avoiding open spaces even when there's no real threat. You keep your hands free and ready for action, never allowing yourself to be encumbered with unnecessary items. You position yourself near exits whenever possible, and you never sit with your back to a room's entrance. These behaviours made sense when you were a child in genuine danger, but they persist now as permanent alterations to your basic functioning. Perhaps the most devastating aspect of your survival is what you've lost along the way. You watch normal people, those few who grew up with some measure of safety and protection, and you see them experience emotions that are completely foreign to you. They laugh with genuine happiness, not the bitter amusement that sometimes escapes you when you witness someone else's misfortune. They show affection without calculation, not the careful alliances you form based on mutual benefit. You see them play games and engage in activities purely for enjoyment, and you literally cannot understand the point. Every activity in your life has always had a purpose related to survival or productivity. The idea of doing something simply because it feels good seems not just wasteful, but incomprehensible. You've tried to join in their games, but you always end up analysing them for strategic advantage or competitive opportunity, missing the simple pleasure that others seem to derive from pointless activities. They form friendships based on affection and shared interests, while your relationships are built on complementary skills and mutual protection. They trust others with their secrets and vulnerabilities, while you've learned that any information about yourself can be weaponized against you. They hope for better futures and make plans based on optimism, while you prepare for the worst and consider any positive outcome to be an unexpected bonus. You watch them love their families with uncomplicated affection, and you realize that you don't really know what love feels like. You formed attachments to people who helped you survive, and you felt loss when they died. But this seemed to be based more on practical concerns than emotional bonds. The idea that you could care about someone simply because of who they are, rather than what they do for you, is a concept that your damaged psyche can't quite grasp. As you interact with younger children in your community, you begin to understand how trauma passes from generation to generation. When you see a child making a mistake that could be dangerous, your immediate instinct is to correct them with violence because that's how you learned. When you see them showing weakness or vulnerability, you want to toughen them up through harsh treatment because you believe it will help them survive. You tell yourself that you're helping them, that you're preparing them for the realities of life, that showing them mercy now will make them vulnerable later, but you can see in their eyes the same fear that you felt as a child, the same gradual hardening that comes from learning that the world is fundamentally hostile, and that adults are not safe sources of comfort and protection. You watch Marcus training younger boys in combat techniques, and you see him using the same brutal methods that were used on him. He's not deliberately cruel. He genuinely believes that pain is the most effective teacher, that suffering builds character, that children need to be broken down before they can be built back up as functional adults. He can't see that he's passing on his own damage, because that damage has become so much a part of his identity that he can't imagine any other way of being. Sarah works with younger girls, teaching them domestic skills and preparing them for their roles as women in your society. But she teaches them to disconnect from their bodies, to endure pain without complaint, to view their own needs and desires as irrelevant. She's preparing them for a world where women are often victimized, but she's also ensuring that they'll be unable to fight back or seek better treatment, because resistance has been conditioned out of them. David's obsessive cleanliness rituals are being adopted by younger children who see him as a successful survivor. They don't understand that his behaviours are symptoms of trauma rather than practical health measures, but they copy him anyway because they want to survive as he has. His psychological damage is being transmitted as learned behaviour to children who might not have developed these compulsions on their own. You begin to see how entire civilizations can be built on the foundation of collective trauma. The legal systems of your world assume that people are fundamentally untrustworthy and require harsh punishment to maintain order. The economic systems assume that humans are motivated only by self-interest and will exploit others unless prevented by force. The social systems assume that relationships are transactional and that cooperation requires external enforcement. These assumptions make sense if they're based on the behaviour of people who grew up in conditions like yours. If everyone in a society has been traumatised from childhood, then harsh control measures become necessary, because traumatised people often behave in ways that are antisocial and destructive. But the systems themselves then create more trauma, perpetuating the very conditions they were designed to address. The military systems of your world assume that effective soldiers must be emotionally numbed and morally flexible. They're right. People who can kill without hesitation and follow orders without question do make effective warriors. But creating such people requires systematic destruction of normal human empathy and moral reasoning, producing individuals who are useful in combat but damaged in every other aspect of life. The religious systems assume that humans are fundamentally sinful and require punishment and suffering to achieve spiritual growth. This makes sense if the only people developing these systems are individuals who learned to associate suffering with valuable lessons, and who can't imagine personal growth occurring through positive experiences. But these religious frameworks then justify inflicting more suffering on future generations, creating an endless cycle of trauma disguised as spiritual development. You realise that true healing might be impossible for people like you. The damage was done during critical developmental periods when your brain and personality were still forming. The neural pathways that should have developed to process emotions, form attachments, and experience joy were either never created or were actively destroyed through trauma. You see older survivors who have lived for decades with their damage, and none of them seem to have found ways to truly recover. They've learned to function, to adapt, to manage their symptoms, but the fundamental alterations to their personalities and emotional capacities remain unchanged. They're like buildings that were constructed with a flawed foundation. They can be patched and reinforced, but they'll never be as stable as structures built correctly from the beginning. The few attempts at healing you've witnessed have been unsuccessful or even counterproductive. Some survivors try to numb their pain with alcohol or drugs, But this only creates additional problems without addressing the underlying damage. Others try to find meaning in their suffering by becoming religious or philosophical, but their damaged capacity for genuine spiritual experience limits their ability to find real comfort in these pursuits. Some attempt to heal through relationships, hoping that love and companionship might repair what trauma destroyed, but their inability to trust, to be vulnerable, to experience genuine affection makes these relationships difficult or impossible to maintain. They end up in alliances that serve practical purposes, but don't provide the emotional healing they're seeking. As you contemplate your future as an adult in the ancient world, you understand that your survival is both a victory and a tragedy. You've proven that the human spirit can endure almost anything, that children are remarkably resilient, that life finds a way to continue even under the most hostile conditions. But you've also learned that survival and thriving are completely different things, that existing and living are not the same. You're alive, but at what cost? You've survived by becoming someone who can endure anything but enjoy nothing, who can function in crisis but not in peace, who can protect others but not love them. You've developed incredible strength and resilience, but these qualities came at the expense of everything that makes life worth living. You're part of a generation that will pass its damage on to the next generation because you don't know any other way to live. Your children, if you have them, will grow up with parents who can't show affection, can't provide emotional security, can't model healthy relationships or positive coping strategies. The cycle will continue, not because you want it to, but because trauma has become so deeply embedded in your society that alternatives are literally unimaginable. You understand now why the ancient world was so consistently brutal, and why progress toward more humane societies has been so slow and difficult. It's not that people in earlier times were inherently more cruel or less intelligent than modern humans. It's that they lived in societies where most adults were survivors of severe childhood trauma. And traumatized people create traumatizing systems because it's the only kind of world they understand. Yet even in your damaged state, you occasionally catch glimpses of what might be possible under different circumstances. Sometimes you meet someone who grew up with unusual protection and security, perhaps the child of wealthy parents who valued their offspring, or someone raised in a religious community that emphasized compassion over punishment. These individuals move through the world differently than you and other survivors do. They seem to experience emotions more fully and recover from setbacks more quickly. They form relationships more easily and trust others more readily. They find joy in simple pleasures and maintain hope even when circumstances are difficult. They're not necessarily happier. They often struggle with the harsh realities of your world, but they seem more fully alive in ways that you can barely comprehend. When you interact with these rare individuals, you feel something stirring inside you that might be recognition of what you could have been under different circumstances. It's not exactly envy, because you can't quite imagine being different than you are. It's more like a distant echo of possibilities that were destroyed before you were old enough to understand what you were losing. These encounters give you a strange kind of comfort, not because they offer hope for your own healing, but because they prove that human beings are capable of being something other than what trauma made you. They suggest that the cycles of damage that define your world are not inevitable features of human nature, but rather the products of specific circumstances that could theoretically be changed. You're 16 years old, and you've made it further than most children in your world ever will. You've survived hunger, violence, disease, exploitation, and systematic cruelty. You've developed skills and strength that would be remarkable in any context. You've proven that human beings can adapt to almost any circumstances and find ways to continue. But you've also learned that childhood, as it should exist, is one of humanity's most precious and fragile creations. The innocence, joy, security, and freedom that children deserve are not natural givens. They're achievements that require deliberate protection by adults who choose to prioritize children's well-being over their own immediate interests. You carry within yourself the evidence of what children can survive, and the knowledge of what they should never have to endure. You're both a testament to human resilience and a reminder of human capacity for cruelty. Your survival is proof that the human spirit is incredibly difficult to destroy completely, but your damage is proof of how much can be lost along the way. As you settle down to sleep, perhaps for the last time as someone who could still be considered a child, you understand that tomorrow you'll wake up as an adult forever marked by the childhood you lived through, forever changed by the world that created you. You'll carry your scars into whatever future awaits, and those scars will shape every decision you make, every relationship you form, every response you have to the challenges that lie ahead. You are a survivor of the nightmare that was childhood in the ancient world. You endured what killed others, adapted what couldn't be changed, and found ways to continue when continuation seemed impossible. Your survival is both a victory over the forces that tried to destroy you, and a tragedy of all the possibilities that were lost in the process of staying alive. The child you once were, innocent, trusting, full of natural curiosity and capacity for joy, is gone forever, replaced by someone harder and more resilient, but also more limited and damaged. You mourn that lost child even as you recognise that your transformation was necessary for survival. You're grateful to be alive even as you recognise how much life costs when it requires such fundamental alterations to the self. Tomorrow begins your life as an adult in the ancient world, carrying forward all the lessons that trauma taught you, bearing witness to what children can endure, and participating in the slow, difficult process of human civilization's gradual movement towards something that might someday allow children to be children, rather than requiring them to become survivors. As we come to the end of our journey through the nightmare of ancient childhood, you're lying in your bed in the modern world, probably feeling a complex mixture of emotions. You've experienced, through the power of imagination and storytelling, what it was like to be young in a time when childhood as we understand it simply didn't exist. You felt the constant hunger, the brutal education, the early introduction to violence, the random threat of disease, and the systematic cruelty that defined young life for most of human history. Take a moment now to feel the softness of your mattress, the warmth of your blankets, the security of knowing that tomorrow will bring food, safety, and people whose primary job is to protect and nurture you. These aren't just modern conveniences, they're revolutionary achievements that represent thousands of years of slow, difficult progress in how human societies treat their most vulnerable members. The child you follow through this story, surviving birth without medical care, learning through pain and punishment, fighting daily battles against starvation, becoming a soldier before age 10, living through plague after plague, existing as human property, witnessing systematic cruelty, and reaching adulthood bearing scars that would never heal. That child represents the reality for billions of young people throughout history. Their experiences weren't exceptional or extreme, they were normal. What's exceptional and extreme is the childhood you're living right now. The idea that children deserve protection, education, play, love, and the freedom to develop at their own pace is a very recent invention in human history. The concept that children have rights, that they shouldn't be forced to work, that they shouldn't be subjected to violence, that they shouldn't be treated as property. All of these ideas would have seemed not just impossible but absurd to most adults throughout most of human history. Your ability to go to school instead of working in dangerous conditions, to play with toys instead of weapons, to express your opinions without fear of punishment, to receive medical care when you're sick, to eat regular meals, to sleep in safety. These represent victories in a long struggle to create something that had never existed before, a protected space where young humans could develop into their full potential. This doesn't mean that childhood today is perfect, or that all children in the modern world are safe and protected. Millions of children around the world still face conditions similar to what you experienced in our story. Child labour, abuse, exploitation, and violence haven't disappeared. They've just become less common and less socially acceptable. The struggle to protect children continues every day, in every country, requiring constant vigilance and effort. But it does mean that we've proven something important. Childhood doesn't have to be a nightmare. The suffering you experienced in this story wasn't inevitable or natural. It was the result of choices made by adults and societies that prioritized other things over the well-being of children. When we make different choices, when we decide that children deserve protection and care, we can create different outcomes. The transformation of childhood from nightmare to protected space happened gradually. over centuries, through the efforts of countless people who decided that children deserved better. Reformers who fought against child labour, educators who developed gentler teaching methods, medical professionals who reduced child mortality, lawmakers who created legal protections for young people, and parents who chose to prioritise their children's well-being over economic benefit. Every right you enjoy as a child, the right to education, to protection from abuse, to adequate food and shelter, to medical care, to play and rest, was fought for by someone who understood that children are not just small adults or economic resources, but developing human beings with their own inherent worth and dignity. As you drift off to sleep tonight, surrounded by the safety and comfort that modern childhood provides, remember the children of the ancient world who never experienced such security. Remember that your comfortable bed was paid for by their suffering, that your protected childhood was built on the foundation of their sacrifices, that your freedom to be young and innocent exists because other people refused to accept that childhood had to be a living nightmare. And remember, too, that you have a responsibility to protect and extend these achievements. The childhood you're experiencing isn't guaranteed to continue forever. It requires each generation to choose again to prioritise children's well-being, to resist forces that would exploit or harm young people, to continue the long work of creating a world where every child can be safe, loved, and free to develop their full potential. The story of ancient childhood is a horror story, but it's also a story of human resilience and the possibility of change. The children who suffered through those dark times weren't different from you. They had the same capacity for joy, creativity, love, and growth. What was different were the circumstances they faced and the choices made by the adults around them. You have the power to ensure that the nightmare of ancient childhood remains in the past, that future generations of children will inherit an even safer, more nurturing world than the one you're growing up in. The long, difficult journey from the brutality of ancient childhood to the protected space of modern childhood isn't finished. It's a story that you'll help write with every choice you make as you grow into adulthood. Sleep well tonight, knowing that you're part of one of humanity's greatest achievements, the creation of childhood as it should be, and dream of a future where every child, everywhere, can experience the safety, love, and freedom that you might sometimes take for granted, but which represents the hopes and struggles of countless generations who came before you. The nightmare of ancient childhood is over for you. Your job now is to help ensure it's over for everyone.